Hello and welcome to the Soul Sync podcast. Now, you know who it is. It's me, Jason Paul, but I'm still going to say it anyway. This is an unusual episode today. I'm going to say from the get-go that I'm currently sitting in a hotel room in Toronto. I've been out shopping all day today and I thought I'd come for a few days to get away here. Now, I'm going to try and forget that this is a podcast from the very straight off, I'm just going to say. Because what lies ahead is I want to basically tell you a bit of a story. And I'm currently sitting on Zoom in this hotel room with my partner. I'm going to say Matty. And he has his own podcast from the get-go. So do you want to tell us a bit about the story on how we first came to have our own podcast, a bit about your podcast and why you've come on and what we're going to try and do today?
Yeah, so I've got a podcast with my co-host Molly called Trauma and Tea. The podcast focuses on trauma, mental health, and the journey to wellness. We're 2 episodes in, so we're fairly new, and that was a synchronicity between us when we met, that we were both starting our podcast journey. So yeah, I've come on today to talk to you a bit about your journey, because we've both noticed a bit of a link between trauma and spirituality, and yeah, I guess that is the story of Trauma and Tea.
It is, and I think that one thing that I've noticed, right, is, and I think that this has become more apparent in recent days since I watched the Diary of a CEO that you suggested that I watch. And I've realised that doing an episode by myself, and when it's just me, the microphone, and me talking, it is totally different to having the dynamic of there being 2 people, a conversation between 2 people, and as a result of that conversation, it's just a totally different dynamic. So I wanted to talk through more of my story today for a few reasons. First reason is I want to raise awareness. I want to continue to raise awareness of the subjects that are very close to my heart, but I also feel that by sharing more of my story and a lot of you getting to know me better, even if I help only 1 or 2 people in the process, then that for me is an absolute win. And that's the whole reason I do this podcast, and it's the whole reason why I put so much of my heart and soul into the podcast, is because I'm doing it to help people ultimately.
Yeah. So basically, Jason, should we just get into it? And I'll start by asking you, can you share a moment with us, a moment or an experience from your childhood that you think has shaped the person that you have become today?
Whoa, my goodness, you went straight in with that question. Something I'm actually really going to have to think about now. Do you know what I'm going to say from the get-go about this podcast as well? Is I know that we've tried to have this conversation before, and what some of the things that are going to come up today are things that are memories as I remember them, but a lot of my memories and things that have happened to me and traumas and experiences, as every day I get older, I'm still processing some of that. I'm still departmentalizing some of it. I'm still trying to wonder about why it happened and what that has done to me in this day to shape the person I am, because I'm always looking backwards as well as forwards, as well as being present. But to answer the question, because I have a habit of going off on a tangent, even when I've got a guest, let alone when I'm trying to be the one that's talking. I remember from my childhood, I always remember it being me, my mum, and my brother as 3 kind of musketeers. And I was very close to my mum because she had me when she was 18 years old. So 17, just turned 18. And we kind of grew up together in a lot of ways, because even when I was, say, 10, my mum was 28. A 28-year-old with a 10-year-old is absolutely crazy when I think back to the age that I am now. That means that I'm going to start attempting to do maths on this, which is never a good idea. But that means I would have a 20-year-old by now.
Well, I'm 28 now, and my daughter will be turning 9 this year.
Do you know what? That's such a good thing, though, because I really, really, really appreciate from the bottom of my heart my mum, and the fact that she isn't much older than me now, and you only really start appreciating those things when time. You always ask someone. You remember you have these moments when you would have been in your teenage years or something, and you would hear elderly people, it might have been your grandparents, and they might say to you, "Oh, time goes really quickly, the only valuable," or that said something philosophical to you in regards to time going quick and it only seeming like yesterday. And you sort of, as a young person, go, "Oh, yeah," you just don't totally doesn't even enter your thoughts or your mind process because you've got your whole life ahead of you. But when not, I'm saying this not as someone who's 60, but time does go quicker the further you look back at it. And I think that my 30th only seems like yesterday. My perception of time has also changed the older I've got, because now when I even think back to my virgin days, I look at it in a whole nother dimension. So even when I look at my childhood, I'm looking at it through my lived experiences and where I am now and where I'm on my journey. So and my even my memory and the way that I recount the story will change the older I get, because I will change the relevance, the parts of the story which are relevant to my identity today.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to the earliest parts that you can remember then. So you grew up in London.
I grew up in London, so how I came to be in this world, I guess, is the first um, thing to go into. Seems natural. It's the beginning. It's the creation. Um, my mum lodged in a house with a landlord. His name was John. And it's funny because I even blocked parts of this out because this is a painful memory in itself, because of the fact that I don't know my biological dad, and for most of what I know, he still isn't even bothered about my existence. So, I think that's a trauma that stays with you. I feel that and even my stepdad, I've never had I did have a close relation. No, no, actually, I never had a close relationship with him, actually. I think I'm trying to look at it through some kind of tinted rose, but no, it wasn't. So essentially, my mum and John, she was lodging from him. He was the landlord. There was obviously in some level of romantic relationship, and my mum had to stop working in the final weeks of pregnancy because obviously she was too heavily pregnant with me. I think I was a little bit overdue. And then she had me in hospital. She came back, and the lovely John had left all of her belongings on the doorstep because she hadn't paid the rent. That was my dad. And then my mum had to then move back in with her parents, my nan and granddad, with me. But there was no room in that house. They lived in, I believe it was Harrow in North London. And it was just as house prices were starting to in London get a bit silly, and they were starting to go up. So they lived in Harrow, but they decided to sell up and move to Southampton, because Southampton, it was one of these up and coming cities of the day, where it was getting investment. But they then moved there, and my mum eventually moved into a like kind of bed and breakfast setup with me. So we grew up with barely even a roof over our heads in a lot of ways. And my biological dad, have I seen him since? I've seen him about 4 times over the years, but I've never been interested in seeing him. And even when I did, I just felt that I don't know. There was never a connection. There was never a bond. There was never an interest in me. So I kind of finally agreed at 24 that, that I think I've given this guy, enough chances now. And then that was it. I've never seen him again.
Okay, so there was a lot there. So you grew up in London until the age of when?
So I lived in London till I was about 12 years old. And then we moved around London. We did move around London a fair bit during that time. But then eventually my mum, my stepdad decided that me and my brother needed our own room. We didn't have one in London. We're in a tiny little, not tiny, but small enough, you know, two bunk beds in that room was a squeeze. So they decided my mum and my stepdad, they started looking at other towns in the country. And they discovered this beautiful, quaint, idyllic looking town in Kent called Rochester. Beautiful, got a castle, got this beautiful school called King's School, private school, very expensive school, one of the best schools in the country. But unfortunately for Rochester, it's surrounded by less desirable towns, one of which is a place called Chatham, where actually the word chav derives from there. So I think that's a pretty adept description of a town. But they moved there, but we didn't realise that actually Rochester was the only nice bit about that area, and everything that sandwiched it in the middle wasn't so nice. So I ended up going 12 years old. We moved from London. We went to Kent, and I started going to an all-boys school. Now, the problem with that school was the school system in Kent was different to the school system in London. School system in London, no grammar school system, or school system in Kent, loads of grammar schools. For anyone that doesn't know what a grammar school is, it's a better state school, but you have to sit an exam in order to get into it. So because I hadn't been prepared for it and hadn't done the exam, I by default had to go into the not very good school. And the school was awful. Bloody awful school. There was no passion for education. The main thing about that school, and I think that school experience did scar me in a lot of ways, actually. I arrived from an all right mixed school to go to a boys' school at a time where I was, you know, questioning my own sexuality. And I think that a lot of the school trauma, I'm still unpacking, because what happens to you in school? So I was bullied a lot in school, stuff like that affects the person you are today. It does. It probably still is deep trapped within my psyche somewhere.
Yeah, and when is probably the earliest age you can remember bullying?
What happened was I went to this all boys school in Kent, 12 years old, and all the school had already, so I joined in year 8. Oh, no, I joined in year 9. So actually, sorry, I'm lying. I was a little bit older. I'd been about 13. So I arrived, and bear in mind, there is a lot to be said, but when a child starts in a secondary school, it is a change in dynamic. You're suddenly throwing puberty and kind of adolescence in the mix with social dynamics within a classroom setting. There is a lot going on for someone in their development at that stage as an individual. And I was lucky because in some ways I grew up before there was all this Instagram, Facebook. I couldn't imagine going through that social dynamic and that change in puberty, but having this over glamorized existence of where children are striving to get likes as well. So this was a different time. But to go back to me coming into the school. So I started in year 9. The problem was obviously there were social dynamics already in place. I didn't know what I was entering into. Now, the school gave me a very nice introduction by just throwing me into the morning registration some morning. So, no, here's a buddy. We're going to sort of throw you in nice and easily. I just got announced at the front of the class that this is this is Jason. He's new, and straight away, I would say that I gravitated. I didn't know where I was going in terms of friendship or whatever. But I knew that I needed to make friends, and it felt different. I was in a new town, in an all-boys school, in a fairly rough area where we'd lived in an all-right area in London. This town, Strood, backed onto Rochester. It was an absolutely horrible area. So I was having to deal with quite a lot. But yeah, I think that's the earliest memory. It was probably as soon as I started the school.
Yeah. Um, and can you tell me about any maybe romantic connections that you might have had around this time?
So when I guess to go back to when was the first time that I realised I was gay, and I'll reverse it
Yeah.
back because that has some relevance in the story. So I, when I was in year seven in the mixed school, I used to have a crush on this girl Laura, and she was a bit of a tomboy. She was sort of always playing football with the boys, and even she sort of had a bit of a husky voice in a way, sort of looking back. But I really started to like her. But then I noticed when I went into year eight, I actually really started to have these same feelings, but not for her anymore, but for her brother in the year above. And that was a really confusing time, like because it was you got to think as well, it was before uh, gay and LGBT stuff was kind of in the everyday mainstream media. There was back then, and I don't want to sound like I'm historic when I'm saying this because I'm really not. But even if you go back 20 years, it was a vastly different landscape. I think just when I was,
Go back 10 years.
yeah, even if you go back 10 years, yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah, I think Queer as Folk, and that was one program that I used that really opened my eyes a lot. And I must have seen that when I was about 15 that came out. Um, and it really solidified a lot of things in my mind. But my first romantic relationship was I'd been with a girl for a little bit, but I'm gonna leave that part of the story out because I don't think it's massively relevant. But you might say, actually, no, it is. But I don't think it is that relevant. Probably has some relevance. But I was friends with a guy called Dane, and we'd become good friends. We were in the same form. He was very, very funny. And anyway, as you do, when you're young, well, in probably popular British culture, we would go to the park and we would drink some um, cheap, horrible cider, something of a Strongbow equivalent. And then I remember one evening I said to Dane, I like you when I was drunk. But he just brushed it under the carpet completely, just said, don't worry, look, it's fine. It doesn't change anything, blah, 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 blah. And that was the last time we spoke of it. Then one evening, Dane was sleeping over at mine. It must have been about 3 in the morning. And he woke me up and said, Jason, I just want you to know I like you too. And then that was the first ever time we kissed. Now, Dame came from a funny background. He lived right by the school, but in the not very nice area, and he had about 8 sisters, which was just absolute chaos going to his house, like absolute chaos. Now looking back, and he had a bit of a funny upbringing with that many girls around him. But what started happening was Dane and I would sometimes do these kind of things together, explore sexually. But he then ended up getting a girlfriend, I think, for appearances. And that was very hard for me to kind of deal with, especially being young, because I was kind of seeing him, living this double life. And, that started to make me question my own, how would I say it? My own worth, my own beliefs. I felt like a bit on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, it started to, I don't think that was good for me. I was towards the end of school in year 11, I barely even turned up. I just didn't feel safe at school. And I think, yes, I had friends. Um,
You say you didn't feel safe at school, and why was that?
so the school was very, very dangerous. People would bring weapons into school. That was not uncommon. So, for instance, we wouldn't do any science practicals or any food technology because we wouldn't be allowed to handle knives. The last time it was famous, the school. The last time it did a science practical was when a teacher's tie got lit on fire by a Bunsen burner maliciously. And then the school decided to remove Bunsen burners. So it was, yeah, so the academic lessons were rubbish. I was in the bottom set in maths, English, science, whatever. But the reason I was in the bottom set was because there was so little inspiration or whatever, or teaching, but I was never going to advanced sets because I wasn't being taught. Like the whole system just made no sense at school to me.
Okay. So, and how old are we up until this point now? So, Dane, you've got your first romantic connection, and this happened to Dane. How old are we at this point?
So this was about year 11, and what happened around that time, and the reason I stopped going to school more than the reason my absence grew from what it was to what it then became, which was barely turning up at all, was, um, and you have to remember, I'm recounting a lot of this now. A lot of this stuff, you push it right to the back of your mind, close the door on it, lock it up with a key. Thank you. Don't need to relive that, because if you relive all of your life, it starts to drive you crazy. You have to lock a lot of it away to then access it if you need, but I guess that's you also go for this period of healing and cleansing and needing to go back into those filing cabinets. So sometimes that filing cabinet to me has been shut for a long time. I haven't needed to go back and relive that recently. So it's when I go back, it's like, when you back up a computer on and you compress the file and you compress it and compress it and compress it. I think that's what I've done in my brain. So I'm just currently extracting the information for you, Matt. What was the question again? I've forgotten the question now whilst trying to be funny with my analogies.
So we're up to the point now. How old are we now? You're going through this with Dane. You said obviously you stopped going to school, and there was a reason that you stopped going.
Oh yes, the reason. So Dane was going out with Joanne, and the dynamic was getting increasingly weirder because I wasn't wanting to go out with them, watch them two together. So I was just avoiding going out with them because it was painful for me. Because I think I actually, well, I'm not even going to say actually, I did love Dane. That was my first ever feelings of love. And when I would see them together, knowing it would just, it hurt me as well because Joanne would also come and talk to me about problems in their relationship as a friend. Being Dane's best friend, she would ask me for advice. Now you can see straight away that dynamic is not working, because then I'm starting to be dishonest with her. I'm either going to give her two bits of advice. I'm either going to give her genuine advice to help the relationship work, or I'm going to give her stuff to try and break them up through jealousy and whatever. And I started to find myself going from the first type of advice to the second type of advice. So that wasn't good for my soul at that point either. Anyway, to cut this long story a bit shorter, one night I'd obviously text Dane something, and this was the days way before the smart touchscreen phones. This was and you'd look at the phone, the text would be on the screen. There was no you might have had a 4-digit passcode maybe, but watch someone type that in once you remember that. Anyway, I sent him a message, not realizing he was with her. And then she saw the message, and immediately it spread like wildfire around the girls' school. Now, the girls' school was adjoined to the boys' school, probably about half a mile down the road. And obviously, the moment it spread around the girls' school, just as quickly, it spread around the boys' school. And it became a horrible dynamic because what happened was he was getting absolutely ridiculed for it. And it was being brought up in every lesson in teasing. So tell us about it. And it started to get to the point where I started to bite back. At one point, I was even getting beaten up in the playground, and my brother had to run over and defend me. And it made Dane not want to talk to me and just not be seen with me or whatever. Because the problem was at home he had 8 sisters that all went to the girls' school. So even if we'd seen each other, it'd be like instant, probably quicker than modern day broadband. It'd be round the school. So it was a really hard situation. So we did end up meeting up a lot, but it would be not going to school. Then, because we've not gone to school and we've both not turned up on the same day, people put 2 and 2 together. Then we'd not want to go to school more. So it got to the time where study leave came up, and I was still trying my best in some regards, but I do remember distinctly, you know, when you have these things that you remember. I remember me saying to my mum, going up and being really worried, and I said to her, "What does this mean for my life? The GCSEs?" And I was really stuck questioning it. I was worried about my ability to get a job or whatever. At the time, I was performing magic, and I had started making some money through that. So I was very passionate about performing magic. Went to a magic society, and I was just starting to find my feet with performing at that time. And I'd made a little bit of money from doing it. So in my mind at the time, it was, right, I need to take this professional as quickly as possible. So I started contacting local newspapers, raising my profile, one of which the articles you've seen is in my office. That was when I was starting to do the restaurant work and whatever. So the time came at school where it was study leave, and then I started ratcheting up my magic to a new level and trying to make as much as possible through that. Now, I'd be booked up a lot on Friday and Saturdays, but during the week, I filled that time with washing dishes in a restaurant. And I wasn't really knowing where I was going with my life then. I think a lot of children and young people now have a very distinct direction. I'm going to do this because I want to become this, and I want to do this for this reason, or I'm going to. And I do look at young people now and think to myself, it's a very hard decision to make, isn't it? It's such a young age. What are you going to do? What's your next move? What's your game plan? And how do you decide that as a young person? You've either got some level of influence around you in terms of parents or whatever, because it's a big decision to make at a young age.
Yeah. So how old are we now? Tell me about what age are we at now? So we've left school now, have we?
We've left school, 16 years old.
Do you have any relationship with drugs or alcohol at this point?
I had obviously been drinking the cider in the park.
Mm-hmm.
My first experience really of drinking, I think I quite liked the escapism and the confidence it gave me, because being gay, finding my identity and stuff, I was starting to find my confidence with magic. I was starting to find a persona that worked on stage. And it was quite tongue-in-cheek. I've always been very witty. I don't know what it is. I'm very good at coming back with stuff, and I think that's why podcasts work quite well. I think it's an ADHD brain that does that. I can go through about funny 5 responses in micro nanoseconds, and that seemed to play quite well into magic, especially for hecklers. I was noticed I was becoming quite good with those as well. But with Dane, I had to Dane, obviously, like I said, he came from the neighbouring town next door, not very good area, and he was smoking cannabis, not regularly, but it would be the thing of the day, you know, that you'd do with some friends. Well, in that area anyway. I'm probably saying this is some people think, what, is this a thing that kids do? But you do, you experiment, don't you? And it was becoming popular culture at the time. It was at the time when American Pie was out. You know, a lot of people were experimenting with cannabis. I think at the time it might have even not been illegal. Or maybe I'm just imagining that. I don't know. Maybe it was. I can't remember. It probably wasn't, because I think if my mum had known, I'd have got absolutely fucking bollocked for it. So, say that again.
It was.
Okay, it was then. I can't remember. Don't know where I've got that from. So we would occasionally come and sit in my garage at my house, which wasn't attached to the house. It was sort of round the side, so it was a little bit private. And I'd made it into a sort of a teenager snug, so to speak. There was an old sofa in there. There was a dartboard in there. It was actually somewhere where Dane and I ever had our first my first ever sexual experience with a guy was in that snug, and there was like a fire in there as well, like with a gas bottle. So it was almost like a little private space. But the first ever time I tried cannabis, I was in that garage with him. And I must have had about 10 Lynx bottles with me because I said, I've got to spray it loads. I've got to spray it. My mum might find out. Um, I've got to make sure. So I don't know what she must have thought when she went in there next. It smelled like a pimp's boudoir in there or something. So that was my first experience. My first experience. And it was probably my last experience for a while of anything that you would say falls under the banner of a substance other than alcohol.
So, you leave school, you start working, washing dishes and performing magic. Tell me about, kind of take me from there.
So I was washing the dishes and my magic was becoming increasingly more popular because what I would do is I would perform in restaurants and then I would do a lot of things that involved me giving my business card out. So tricks involving business cards, predictions, and then I would give the cards out. So I was getting busier and busier and busier with that. And I was starting to feel more confident in my sexuality because in school, a couple of the guys that I got to know, not really close with, but I knew them. They were in my year, but I didn't really. I knew of them, but I wasn't particularly close socially because we weren't in any of the same lists and same forms or whatever. But a couple of them, it was back in the day of MSN Messenger. To anyone that had that, MySpace, that around that time. God, I used to spend hours on MSN Messenger because it was before WhatsApp and anything. You could spend hours on it. And it was around that time. Anyway, I'd started chatting a lot to these two guys from my year on MSN Messenger, and but both of them had openly come out as gay, which I was. Oh, how did I come out? Well, the way I came out and the way I remember it is this: I had a computer in my room, big thing, not a nice little shiny MacBook or something that you boot up and it takes about 5 minutes to start engaging. And I'd been on some chat site, some gay site, and I'd obviously not shut it down properly. And when my mum went on there, she saw it. So my mum being my mum, we used to like going to the theatre together. We used to go to the theatre a lot in London. We went to the theatre one evening. I think it was to see the Men in Black. And my mum took me to a bar in Soho. Instantly, it came to me that this was a gay bar. And she said, "Oh, I thought I'd bring you here." And I said, "Why have you brought me here?" And she said, "Well, is there anything you want to tell me?" I said, "No, there isn't."
That's
Yeah, it's funny actually thinking back to it now. It is funny. Um, Eventually, I said to her I was bi. I settled with bi initially. I think very soon afterwards,
fine.
she just knew. To be fair, she just knew. Um, where am I going with this story? Oh, so Magic and the two guys. So I was building my confidence. I had the two friends that I were friends with, and we started to go into a local gay bar together. And then I really started to realise that I was gay. My magic was getting ever more popular. Bookings were going up. I was building my confidence as a young person, and I was starting to feel into this role. I was still at that time very hurt by the Dane thing. And I couldn't seem to shake Dane off in my life as well. I would often, still meet with him and whatever. And as time went on, he was just hurting me more and more, probably not intentionally, but it just was hurting. So eventually I went to college, so I'm missing a bit out. I went to college for a very brief amount of time because I suddenly had a panic that washing dishes wasn't the most sensible idea. I need to get a qualification. So I left it quite late in the day for the college enrolment, and I enrolled on an IT course. Very quickly, it became apparent that I have no interest in IT. About 4 months elapsed. I had made some friends in college, and I actually told people at college I was gay, some of my college friends. College really started to make me come out a bit, but I would still not openly tell people, like in my work, that I was gay, but I would be accepting of, so some people would know, some people wouldn't, and I wouldn't hide the fact or not admit it, but I wouldn't be the one to say that I am, so it'd leave people guessing a lot. Every time you speak, it doesn't come straight through straight away. Do you know why? Because I'm speaking. You always, I notice you keep going, yeah, and the Zoom isn't putting it through. In a minute, I'm gonna have to stop and let you talk. But yeah, performing a lot, and then we went on a family holiday, and it was the last ever big family holiday that we went on. So, do you know when I'm talking through all of this? There's so much, it's so easy to go off down a rabbit hole. This is why when I'm doing the solo episode, it could go on for hours. It's so different. It's so, I'm trying to process. A lot of this stuff has come up recently as well in part of my healing. So I'm just going to interlude, but hold where I'm up to. I'm up to the family holiday on the way to Orlando. What I was going to say is, a few weeks ago, I went on something called the Soul Fragment Clearing. And basically, it's where you get someone or yourself to go down to another layer of consciousness and retrieve past memories and bring them back to being in your current being, to almost repair your soul as in some ways. Now, that probably sounds absolutely crazy me saying that, but if you want to find out more, the Kieran Morgan episode talks all about that. And it was only in the last couple of weeks I've actually felt a lot of these memories around that period, the Dane period, the school period, coming kind of back to me. So a lot of it feels like I don't have a feeling of dislike or likingness to it. I just feel an acceptance of those things that happened. So I'm still dealing with a lot of this in my own way. And I look back at it in my own development, where I am on my own mediumship and psychic journey. So, you could ask me this same question in 1 year's time, and you would probably get a very different version and emphasis on the story because of what it means to me in that day.
Yeah.
I just thought that was relevant to, because it's, I'm still unpacking a lot of this in my mind.
Yep. So you're on a holiday to Orlando.
So we went on this family holiday. At the time, I was working in the restaurant and I was doing the magic, and I was really, really into that. We decided to go on this family holiday to Orlando. My brother was with a new girlfriend at the time, who later became his wife, who then later became abusive in her own right. But let's not even go there. That's another story for another day. We went on this family holiday to Orlando. We flew with the airline Virgin Atlantic. Now, to anybody that knows Virgin Atlantic now, or back years ago, will know it's a very sexy airline. People, back in when the airline started, it was blonde ladies wearing really glamorous red outfits. And it was similar to that on that holiday. And I was looking at those cabin crew, and I just thought to myself, I'm working in a restaurant washing up dishes. They come on a plane, and I was getting to talk to the crew as well, and they were very nice. And they were telling me they get on the plane, fly 7 hours, spend 30 hours, 35 hours in New York, having fun, shopping, whatever they might want to do, and then fly back again. And I just thought, I really, really, really want to do that job. It looks like something I want to do. So as soon as I got back, I immediately went online and thought, I'm going to apply for this. And I did. And like I said, actually, in the Law of Attraction episode that I did on this, I put my heart and my soul into that application. Like, and to say I manifested it is an understatement. You know, I felt that uniform. I imagined myself in that uniform. I engaged all of the senses, and that became a reality. So very quickly, I found myself having to look for accommodation in London because I was still living in Kent at the time. Moved back to London and immediately commenced on what was a 6-week training course for Virgin Atlantic. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry, my fault, I was on mute. So you start your career in Virgin Atlantic. Tell me about kind of your life in that period of time, because I can imagine forming romantic connections might have been difficult. I can imagine, but again, a glamorous period of your life. So just tell me about that time.
So I commenced the training, 6 weeks. You go to Crawley and you go to Virgin Atlantic's base, which is it's like the coolest office you've ever imagined. It's not like any normal office. To go from working, washing dishes in this area to the glamour of Virgin Atlantic's head office at 18 years old. Oh my God. It was a dream like come true. I was just bursting with immense pride to be there. And I remember in one of the very first days you do your training, they take you to get the uniform fitted. And this isn't like, you know, here you go, what size are you? They measure you up. They get it like, honestly, when I put that uniform on, at that moment in my life, right then, was the best moment. There was no cares in the world, or what I now look at. I'm sure back then I had loads of cares in the world. There was things, of course, going on. But when I look back at that moment, maybe the way I look at it now is that was a really special moment. So I was on a small training course. There was about 12 of us, and we were all being trained to then go to Heathrow to do different roles. My role was checking in people. Now, checking in people back then was fun. It was before the days of the online check-in odds that you will go to now. It was when everybody would get to the airport 6 hours before. There would be massive queues of people. People would be coming with their paper tickets still. And then you'd find people had bought the wrong ticket, or they bought the wrong bit of the carbon copy with them and it wasn't the voucher. So there was all sorts going on. It was just craziness. Did my training and then started there. And one memory I have, right, and this really was funny. So I did my 6 weeks training, got assigned my team at Heathrow. So I'd do earlies, lates, or nights. Earlies would start 5 a.m. You'd have to get to Heathrow at 4 a.m. to park your car in the car park to then get the staff shuttle bus to the terminal. So you'd be like this. And back then, I was not good at getting up in the mornings. I was even worse than I am now, Matt. And you know how bad I could be in the mornings. Nowhere near as bad as you, though. However, that's the story for another day. So I remember I was on the check-in desk. I was being shadowed by this lady, Annie. And Annie had recently just divorced from her husband, very glamorous virgin woman. She was a bit... she was a bit of a funny one, actually, because she used to talk about men she'd like and tell me about her sex life and stuff. And I was only 18 years old, and me and Annie started becoming quite good friends. I'd actually forgotten all about her until now. And actually, I had another crazy friend at Virgin called Bikwa Wong. And she was just absolutely barking mad and nuts. And we used to go out all the time into London, into Soho. Anyway, one of my first days on the check-in desk, Annie comes over to me and says, so... Jason, she looks at me badge. I say, yeah, hi. And she says, so you gay, you straight then? And I said, I looked at her and I thought, what? Like, how rude and forward. In my mind, I was thinking, this is very... And I said, gay? I said, oh, you're fitting around here just fine, dear, then. She said, they all are. And that was one of my first experiences. And I still remember that vividly. And I did that for a whole year. I would either work on the check-in desks. My personal favourite was the transfer desk. That was where all the trouble would start, was on the transfer desk, because you get people coming in. who've arrived late on their flight and missed their connection, then it would always just be chaos, the transfer desk. And I think I used to like the chaos of the transfer desk. Don't know why, just used to love it, used to love the craziness of it. And then I used to work the gates as well. Now, I started getting this longing feeling that when I would be at the aircraft door, watching the door close and waving goodbye to the crew on board, I used to think to myself, I want to be on the plane going to New York. And then I'd see the flights come back and I'd think, yeah, I want to be getting off that plane now. So you couldn't become cabin crew until you were 19. So as soon as I turned 19, you guessed it, I applied for the cabin crew job. Little did I know at the time, actually, funny this, I applied like I was an external member of the public. So I had to do a whole application form again, go back through the same selection centre as external people. Then when I finally got the job, I realised I didn't need to do any of that. All I needed to do was fill out an internal transfer and have a meeting. So I had to do the whole recruitment process twice, which funny. But then I started my 6-week cabin crew training, and that was actually bloody tough, that time of my life, because I still lived in London, but and I lived in London because Heathrow was in London. So that was near the airport that I worked in. But the problem was when I became cabin crew, even though I'd fly from Heathrow, the training was in Gatwick. So every day I'd have to drive an hour and a half there, hour and a half back, do the whole training day. I did that for 6 weeks. Then I eventually got what they call my wings. And the wings is a massive ceremony. It means basically you get this badge, and that is your badge to say, I am Virgin Atlantic cabin crew. And if it's like a real moment of pride. So I got that, and at that point, my mum and my stepdad and my brother moved from Kent back to London. So I moved back in with them around that time when I first started as cabin crew. Around that time, I started to volunteer as a police officer. And I was what they call a special constable. So on my days off, because what I noticed at Virgin, right, I would get a bit bored because you're only allowed to fly 900 hours a year as cabin crew. So you get big chunks of periods where you'd have a lot of time off. So because I ended up loving flying all the time, I was a crazy kid. Instead of having all my days off, I'd come back from Los Angeles, have one day off, and then go back to like Hong Kong just because I loved the traveling so much. So I'd swap all my flights. But then what happened after about 9 months was I maxed out on the hours I was allowed to fly because of radiation. So then I had large chunks of time off. So I didn't know what to do with that time off. So I thought, I know what, I'm going to become a volunteer police officer in London. So I did that. I studied on the weekends, did 16 weekends, and then got my warrant card, became a police officer in Hammersmith and Fulham, but would volunteer. And I started to make some other friends with other special constables. And it was around that time I entered into a relationship. I would say it was my first serious relationship of sorts. It was with a guy called Ian, and he was in college studying to be a nurse. And it was around that time as well that I then moved out of my parents again and moved into a flat in London. But I was in a bit of a love triangle situation, which had a whole dynamic of itself. There's so much to it, you know. When we started saying this today, Matt, that we were going to do this, I had to accept that. What I've had to accept is I've had to accept the fact that we're only going to get so much out today because there is just so much I could talk about. But I do feel it's relevant to my story, but I also feel it's relevant to the topics that I'm discussing here. And actually, at this juncture, I'm going to mention that I get back from Canada in a few days, and one of the first days where I'm seeing Matt again, where I'm actually going straight onto his podcast, your podcast, to talk on trauma and tea about a part of my story involving the time of my life when it was around psychosis. I'm going to talk all about addiction, a lot on that. I'm looking at Matt now because I'm like wondering if he wants to touch on other subjects today. But there's a lot that I do want to talk about because I had some absolutely awful experiences with addiction. And I think that we all have, and something I've learned recently is we are all the human behavior and the human what am I trying to get at here? basically we can all be addicted. We all have addictive tendencies, whether it be to social media, whether it be to our phones, whether it be to sex, whether it be to drugs, substances, whatever it is. You could be addicted to so many different things. Even exercise can be bad for you if you are addicted to it. And I want to talk about a part of my life that actually brought me a lot of shame. And only recently I felt able to even tell that story to the first person. Funny enough, one of these stories that I'm going to be talking about on Trauma and Tea is a story that the first ever time anyone has known about this. And so you could almost say I've kept it in my soul treasure chest under lock and key, never to be taken out, to be buried under sand with just a map to get to. I'm going to be talking about addiction on Matt's podcast. But what I was trying to say, sorry, I was losing my trail of thought there because I was looking at you smiling at me. Matt, you the first person I ever told that story to, and only as recently as a matter of weeks ago. And to think now I'm going to be talking about it, not just to you in more detail, but also to all of the listeners out there and the people that I want to know that, carrying that shame is not good for you. I carried a sense of shame for such a long time about something where people have recently said to me, why? But I think the more I tell my story, I think the more it will become apparent why I've done that, because in a lot of ways, I'm what you would call, I guess, to the material world as someone who is successful. But it really depends on your view of success and what you deem to be, my version of success is happiness and fulfillment. And I've had to recently talk about this with you in order to put it at peace, to then refile it again, but refile it in a much more neater way where it's not, affecting perhaps the way that I might live my life now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and even view yourself. So let's get back to so you started the Met, you were in a love triangle. Take me through that.
So
whatever you want to focus on, for example, in that period of your life.
I'm going to talk about the story in terms of how I came to join the police.
Yeah.
Because I think this is quite relevant. Bear with me. One thing I've noticed is because I'm doing all the talking, I'm getting rather dehydrated. This is what happens on a solo episode. Then I get 20 minutes in and I've got the driest mouth ever. And I'm sitting there thinking about me dry mouth. So 1 second. Right. So on my training group to become cabin crew, one of the other colleagues I had who was also training, she was training cabin crew as well, was a lady called Imogen. Now, Imogen was older than me. She was about 12 years older than me. She joined cabin crew later than you might say was the average cabin crew. She was about in her early 30s, about 32. Imogen had a bit of a tough life. She had lost her mum very young, and her dad died, and she, the only family she had was her stepdad. But she travelled a lot, and she'd had a lot of experience as well of drugs, and she seemed like she'd sorted herself out in a lot of ways because she was quite spiritual, and she was my first ever, other than my granddad, who was a medium. But the thing with my granddad is he would be in Southampton, and when we went down there, I wouldn't talk about mediumship. I'd be playing with my cousin, talking to him. So I didn't really talk about those things at that time. But Imogen introduced me to like the world of Shantaram, a book called Shantaram, which is about, I can't remember what it was about now, but it's a profound book about something to do with an Indian story, someone being enlightened. And she basically said to me that her and her partner, Leon worked in a restaurant. She was cabin crew. She said to me, they need to get a flat in Putney, and do I want to go 3 ways where I live with them? So they would have 1 bedroom, I would have the other. And I got to know Leon because what me and Imogen would do is we would swap our flights. You could basically, as cabin crew, go onto a portal, list what flight you got, list what you want to swap it for, and then you basically submit a request on the portal, and then the operations team decide if they approve the swap. And you get people swapping for all sorts. Some people will be swapping money to get on a certain flight just so they can take someone on it. So there'd be all sorts of backhand deals going on in terms of what flights you want to swap onto. So me and Imogen had this experience once where we both traded onto a 4-night Antigua. Now, the 4-night Antigua, my God, was beautiful. You'd fly from Gatwick, and because the flight only went twice a week, if you went on the Sunday, because the plane doesn't come back, the return plane doesn't come back for 4 days later, you get 4 days, and they put you in some really glamorous, like, Sandals resort. And you could just imagine what goes down 4 days of being crew with a load of, like, young people all being given money. So obviously you'd start drinking. The drinking would start the moment before you'd even land, actually. Everyone would start making up their drink bottles of what concoction they're gonna take off. Particular favourites were the Sex on the Beach. That was very popular. We always had lots of cranberry juice, orange juice, vodka in abundance. You'd get the people that would be a little bit more risque and start decanting bottles of champagne into Volvic bottles. That was a rather risky drink because they had this rule that you could only take off the aircraft what's already open, and then you get some crew just going pop open, pop open, pop open. These can all come off the aircraft as well. But that was kind of the fun of it. The captains would get involved and everything like that. So Imogen took her boyfriend, Leon, on the flight. So I got to know him in 4 nights, and me and Leon got on really, really well. Imogen was actually quite horrible to him on that trip. And sort of a bit patronizing. So me and Leon grew a bit closer. So I kind of, when I moved into Putney, I knew it was a wrong decision at the time, but I just went along with it because Imogen was very persuasive and told me I'd be living my best life. But as soon as I moved out, I had to get rid of my car because I couldn't have a car in Putney, because if you ever try to drive near Putney, it's just near on impossible. You may as well just walk. All a car will do is bring you constant misery in that London borough. It's all just one-way roads, no parking, nowhere to park your car, have to go around one-way roads endlessly. But anyway, I moved into the flat. Very quickly, I started to have a great time when Imogen wasn't there with Leon, and it just been me and Leon. But as soon as Imogen would come back, it would just not be as good. So Leon was at a bit of a dead end in his life. Well, not a dead end, but the problem was Imogen would be flying all over the world, and he worked in a restaurant, and he was at a similar age to Imogen, and he wanted to get into the police. So he tried already, and the thing with the police recruitment process is it's the same all over the country, whether you're at the furthest tip of Scotland or right down the bottom, it's the same. So what Leon had done, he'd applied twice, not got it, and he was just about to apply for the 3rd time. At that time, I was already a special constable for the Met, so I made the decision to try and apply for the regulars with him. The logic for doing that was at the time the Met were recruiting for the 2012 Olympics, I was flying all over the world being diabetic, which was a bloody nightmare because it was before the days of the fancy insulin pumps now, which regulate. I'd have to take 1 injection every 12 hours and trying to keep tab of that whilst being in different time zones. So I'd have to wake up through the middle of the night. I'd have to do my injections at really weird times, and I'd have to constantly live on UK time, but living a life that wasn't UK time. So it did have an expiry or a best before date on it, and I knew I couldn't do it forever. And Leon had persuaded me that it'd be life-changing to join the Met. At that time, I was having a really good experience of being a volunteer police officer, but the difference being, I guess I could pick and choose what parts of the job I wanted to do because I was doing it on my own time, being quite a big difference. So long story short, Leon and me both applied at the same time. He then decided that he was going to pay to do a course, like a 2-day course, which would teach him how to pass the recruitment process. Leon gets his interview about 2 weeks before mine, goes for it. And then I get back from a trip. Imogen's gone, thank God, because they were starting to really not get on at that point. Leon then sat down with me and I said he would give me all the preparation he felt I needed for the interview. And he'd sit down with me going through number reasoning tests, all these different tests. And I must admit, he was overwhelming me. I was drinking whiskey. I'd just come back from a night flight, had my interview in the morning. And after so long, I said to Leon, look, I know you mean well, but I think I've just got to go, and I'm not even that bothered at this point if I get it or not. So I went along. I did kind of say to myself that, if I got it, yeah, I do want to make a difference. It'd be a good thing to do. It'd be worthwhile. But I also went where, I wasn't desperate to leave the job I was doing. I think I went more out of support and intrigue than anything. So anyway, about a week must have elapsed, and it was on the days of Skype. Leon Skyped me when I was away, because that was what we used back then, Skype. Everything was Skype. He told me he didn't get it. His world had ended. He didn't know what he was going to do now. He's applied 3 times. He hasn't got it. What's his game plan? What's his life plan? He went into a period of sadness, having to reevaluate his life plan. He was a bit of a free spirit, Leon. And then time elapsed, forgot all about it. And then Leon called me up and said, look, the letters arrived from the Met. Do you want me to open it? And was on Skype again. I said, yeah, whatever, just open it. He opened it. He said, you got it. I thought, oh, my God. So then I was in a bit of a catch-22, because at that point I wasn't even sure that I wanted it. But because Leon hadn't got it and it meant so much to him, for me to just turn it down almost felt a bit insulting. So I kind of said to myself, well, look, let's just give this a go. Let's go into it 100%. That's your course now. And you're going to use this as a platform to help people. And that was when I decided to all of a sudden apply to, accept even. And then I started the absolute difficult, very, very, very difficult police officer training process, which I found really hard.
And what did you find hard about it?
So I remember on the first day I got there, and I got there with a suitcase, because you had to live there. We were one of the last groups to ever reside on it. Because what used to happen was you go there, you'd stay in the tower block. The Metropolitan Police, had a big training school, and right slap bang in the centre of this training school in North London, in Hendon, was like a 1950s style tower block. It looked like at any point something could blow it over. It looks like it was dilapidated. Got there on day one with my suitcase and went up to my room, and to say that the room, it was just awful. We were the last ever group to stay in it, because it was getting shut down because the conditions were so bad. So I rocked up, and what I found really difficult about the police officer training was, it was like being in the army. Every morning you would get up, your trousers, you'd need the exact crease down the trousers. You'd need the hair on everywhere. Your hair must be, no hair on the back of your neck, whatever. And every morning, rain or shine, gale force winds or not, you'd be on that parade square marching around with Staff Clements shouting, "Stop!" I'm not even going to do it because it was such an awful noise. And he'd go, left march, quick. And that would be my life.
Oh, God.
And the training process is meant to, your job is not to have an opinion or whatever. Your job is to be shoulder number 142, X-ray Bravo, reporting for duty, sir. And I just come from Virgin, which was embrace the person you are, individuality, shine and sparkle your brilliance, to look exactly the same as the next man.
Yeah. So
go on.
So you go through the training. You obviously passed.
I did, but it wasn't easy. I did nearly a few times nearly fail, because what would happen is the training of the day would basically be, an average day would be, get up at 6:30, be on the parade square at 7, and then you would go into the teaching environment. Now, they used to do this silly thing where, if you're not a good police officer on the streets, what does the job, what we would always say, what would the job do with you? Well, they'd have to put you in a back office role, in a role that wasn't operational. So what tended to happen was all the police officer trainers were normally very bad police officers who were then tasked with training. So we had this chap called Staff Clements. He was a retired police officer from Yorkshire. His stories were just absolutely ridiculous. And he would talk very monotone, but he'd be funny at times, but you'd be laughing at him, not with him. And he would just talk at you for hours and hours and hours and hours about regulations, the law, not with any real charisma. And I remember at times I'd have to go in the toilet and start doing star jumps because I'd be like, wake up, Jason, Pro Plus. It would be a struggle to get through a lot of days of that training because it was very mundane. And then if we weren't doing that, we'd be beating each other up with handcuffs, restraints. And I used to hate it. Like, I used to remember some of the exercises we do is you'd be put in handcuffs and you used to think, please don't give me like some big brute partner. And then he'd do all the things on you, bending it down to restrain you. And you'd think, and then we'd have to be sprayed in the face with CS spray. We'd have to put massive fires out. And then we had a day where we went to Gravesend to a mock village, which is just like where they do the firearms training and everything. And we'd have horses charging at us, shields, water cannons being sprayed at us. I'd gone from Virgin, staying in the Ritz in Jamaica, to places, to being sprayed with CS spray and stuff. And it was just, it was hard because the whole time I was thinking, have I made the right decision here? It doesn't feel like it. But another way that I justified it was I found that my mum and my stepdad were still living in Ruislip. I was by this point living with Imogen still. When I joined the police, I immediately got key worker housing, and it allowed me to apply for a shared ownership apartment at 23. I bought my first flat, but oh my God, to say it stretched me is an understatement. I must have had about £30 a week to buy food and petrol and everything. I didn't have barely 2 pennies to rub together because I'd mortgaged myself up to the eyeballs to buy this first flat. And then I started my police officer existence into having no real money, working shifts, doing night shifts, doing really unsociable hours. You know, there's nothing like finishing a night shift at 7 a.m, then starting again 3 nights later on 7 again. It messes with you. You start living a very different reality when your working pattern is. You start seeing very different parts of the world as well. When you're a police officer and you do nights, you are seeing a lot of the time the worst of society.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that can do a lot to your psyche as well.
Yeah. So, how old was you when you passed your training?
This is where I always struggle with this and dates because my perception of time changes. And I'm sure you could ask me this question now and I'll tell you one age. But if you ask me again in 3 months, I'll probably give you a different age. I'm going to say the best guess was I commenced it and I started as a police officer when I was about 24. Yeah, about 24.
Tell me a bit about your romantic time up until this period then, because we've heard a bit about Ding, where it's been obviously a bit silent in between Virgin and the Met. What?
At Virgin, I was discovering myself a lot. And I wasn't really with anyone during that time, but I was starting to go to gay bars in other countries. What would happen at Virgin is you would find that the weekend flight, so if San Francisco goes on a Friday, it would be full with gay guys because all the gay guys would swap their flights onto it. So it would be like the party plane going out to San Francisco. It would be like the equivalent of a Mardi Gras going from London to San Francisco or Virgin Atlantic's VS47 flight every Friday. So I was exploring, my sexuality. I ended up dating a guy in Los Angeles called Daniel. And I would fly and see Daniel as much as possible. Probably once every 2 weeks, I'd fly to LA and spend loads of time in LA, like crazy amount of time in LA. I basically met him when I got locked in a changing room and he was a store assistant. The mechanism on the door broke and then I got stuck in the changing room and we got talking when he had to rescue me. But that's a whole other story. But yeah, you can't really say we dated. We lived in different countries, but we saw each other a lot and liked each other. At the time I was doing my So once I was posted onto Borough and I'd finished my training, soon on into that period, which do you know what? I do struggle to think back to this period a lot, but this is because this period is when my life went from being very good at Virgin, very good, living my best life, flying all around the world, and through a few life choices, I suddenly found myself in a totally different time, a totally different world, it felt like, with a totally different outlook because my life had gone from being all things sunshines and roses. Yes, I had the Imogen problems and her and Leon every now and then annoying me, but on the whole, things were good. When I went into the police, I wasn't really liking the job. I was having an all right time because my inspector was gay on my team. My sergeant was also gay. So that was all right. The job was going okay, but I would say that it's not a very positive environment to be in, being a police officer. You start to become very cynical because the way that you kind of brush things off is sometimes dark humor. Sometimes it's just laughter. You have to laugh these things off because if you didn't, you'd cry. So you start becoming a bit desensitized and being someone that is actually a sensitive person and a naturally born empath. I think it was probably in essence damaging my soul because I don't think it's where I should have been because I think I do remember distinctly saying to my mum around that time when I lived in Putney, I started saying to her, like, I'm really starting to, because I'd just come and seen all these different countries, all these different ways of living all over the world, in India, in Africa. I'd become very worldly, and I had, because I was flying all over the world. To then not be flying anywhere around the world or seeing different cultures, to then be seeing the worst of society and people bringing out the worst in each other, people attacking each other, and seeing the fact that how socially broken our social system is in a lot of ways, because you would go and see that, the majority of your time were taken up with people that, weren't providing anything to society. It started to change my view of things. Around that time, I was probably struggling because I didn't have a lot of friends. All my friends were police officers, which, I was friends with them by virtue of the job I did. A lot of my Virgin friends I would struggle to see because they'd be flying all over the world, and we'd have to find a day where my diary working shifts with them being in the right country at the right place at the right time. It was becoming hard to keep those friendships up. So my friendships were becoming more and more gravitated towards being with police officer people. So, and I was lonely. I was lonely because I was living in this flat and I didn't have two pennies to rub together, and then I'd be working unsociable hours. So around that time, I met a guy called Dean on social media. I can't remember how we initially came across each other. It was in the days where Facebook was building. And you'd be always getting friend requests from, one person or another. I can't remember exactly, but I remember around that time, Facebook was still a new thing. We met, and what I instantly liked was I felt a connection with Dean. But I think what I really felt more than anyone was because I was so discontented in my life and my living setup and whatever. I was finding happiness in time with him, of being together, which now I look back with the retrospect of time, I realized to myself that actually there was narcissistic and controlling qualities from the very beginning, actually, and red flags that now, with the benefit of life experience and hindsight, I wouldn't touch with a barge pole. But back then, it was the start of when my life started to go down a very, very rocky road. But when you live in it, you don't see it in the same way, do you?
No. Okay, so we're in the Met. You've met this guy called, was it Dean?
Dean.
Dean. And yeah, I know there's certain things that we're not going to touch on in this in this episode
There's,
because
do you know what there is? There's a lot to this story, and it's from this check mark and this part of the story where we're up to now is when things start to really take a turn in my life, and it's a very traumatizing time, that time, because a lot happened in the period of a few years. I lost my granddad. He had cancer, had to deal with that. We were all very close. He was the absolute bedrock and the pillar of our family. We all were brought together by him. I loved him so much. And it was around that time that my brother's girlfriend, I was starting to get warning flags about her. And she was starting to play some awful games in our family, causing some fractures there. It was around that time that I was not only receiving abuse in work and bullying in work and sexual assaults in work, even by my line manager, but I was also receiving incredible amounts of coercive control at home by a narcissist, which eventually led to me having to stand in a box in front of a Crown Court after a 5-day trial, worried about if I would end the process with my liberty.
mm-hmm.
Would I be put in a prison? And from that moment in my story to then go on within a matter of 5 years to build a multi-million-pound turnover company with psychosis put in the middle of it, with actually another false allegation to the police where I was accused of rape. So you can see how there's a lot of trauma there in regards to relationships, which have an effect on the person I am now today. And I know even us being in a relationship that, you know, what happened to me is part of my story. It's something that I don't always want to wear as part of my identity. But these things that happen to you have to go through these things at times and unpack them and revisit them. And it's only, funnily enough, since I've met you, well, actually, just before I met you, because I don't talk about these things often. I don't talk to friends necessarily about them often. I don't obviously talk to my colleagues. Lots of people talk to their colleagues. I don't do that because, you know, well, how would I even go about explaining? Why would I explain stories like that to my staff? You just wouldn't do it. It's just, you know, maybe that's in my I don't know. But these stories are very painful, aren't they? Sometimes, a lot of the time, things that happen with you. And the first time I've recently thought about it or visited it is when we first got in a relationship and you started asking me questions. And it made me feel very, very, very vulnerable. It made me feel vulnerable when you even, did you remember the first time you even brought up the love languages? It started triggering all sorts of, because I felt it made me look weak. It made me feel like this or whatever. But a lot of that, nothing to do with that, was about you. You were doing exactly the right thing. But what it was doing in me was triggering some of this stuff that's deeply embedded in my psyche.
Yeah. And I guess from this point is just helpful to say, like you've alluded to, there's a lot more that we're going to unpack from this point in trauma and tea around addiction, psychosis, the kind of things that you've discovered about yourself.
I also want to talk about my relationship with my identity, loving myself, and my relationship with sex being gay, because I think there is a real culture within being gay that I think that you know what I'm talking about because you're gay. You know that straight away. And I'm trying to think how to articulate this to people that maybe haven't had much experience. But you must remember the history of gay people and the history of gay rights. And looking back only a few decades ago was the Stonewall riots, was people being, if you watch the program, not Cucumber, what was it with Ollie Alexander? It's a Sin. It's a sin. How people were treated with HIV is a national tragedy. How those people were treated, and when you look at where society was, and even a lot of people now that are in the gay world, we still have people alive that were arrested and persecuted. It's not like it's something back World War II and it's a died out generation. It's not. And all of these things play into popular culture today. And, part of my story does relate to that relationship with sex, and probably still what I clung on to for a long time being gay was shame. And that shame followed me into addiction. That shame followed me into psychosis. And it even followed me into struggling at times to talk about some of these things with you as of recently. That sense of shame.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's definitely something that we're going to unpack further on the Trauma and Tea podcast when we go into your addictions, your psychosis, the kind of things that we've spoken to, and even the maybe we'll touch on some of the medical appointments that you've had.
Do you know what? I did a lot of build up to today talking to you, because I think what I've had to realise is I'm not going to be able to tell all of this in one go, because I'm still processing it. But what I do want to do is start being absolutely true to who I am on this podcast. Mm-hmm. Because what matters to me deeply is living in my own truth, living my own identity. And by doing so, I do think I can help a lot of people out there, because I think there's a lot in terms of, there's so much that I can talk about, even business, even how I did what I did. And what I've come to accept, Matt, is I'm not going to unpack this all in one episode. Do you know what I would advise people to do? Because I'm going on Trauma and Tea very soon, and we're going to have a totally different addition to the dynamic, because we're going to have the wonderful Molly, who I absolutely love. I think she is an amazing interviewer. I suggest, if you want to hear more about this story, the next time I'm going to be, and we will do another one of these on the Soul Sync, absolutely, because there's going to be different things that happen, different things that come up in my life at different times, bring me back to different points and different lessons that I've learned. We will do another one of these. But if you want the next installment and to hear the next installment, the best thing you can do is follow Trauma and Tea, subscribe, because then you'll get notified when it gets released. And I'm going on it next week. Actually, do you know what? This is a synchronicity. I'm going on it next Saturday, which is a week today from the... Oh, no, it's not Saturday today, is it?
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, it is Saturday. Yes, it is. Okay, I'm on it a week today. And today is the full moon. And I'm on it a week from the full moon.
So I do have 3 closing questions that I want to ask, just to summarize kind of the conversation that we've had now. Obviously, as you said, there's a lot more to unpack, which we're going to do on Trauma and Tea and on this podcast. But my first one of the closing 3 are there any misconceptions or stereotypes about trauma that you'd like to challenge or clarify based on the discussion that we've had?
I think that trauma can often be looked at with a sense of shame, because a lot of the time we're revisiting dark decisions, dark things that happened in our lives, which as a result you might have dealt with badly. So you will have shame for your actions as a result of the darkness. Or you will feel not able to live your true truth. Now, I think that if you are not living in your truth, I feel that that has an impact. So I feel that the more truths you don't live, it chips away at you. And the analogy I would probably use is imagine a phone battery and you get your phone and it's got 70% charge or whatever. I now look at it like this. All these parts of you where you aren't living your truth because there's shame chips away at your total amount of charge capacity. So over time, if, like I have buried a lot of mine, I probably buried so many that I was only ever receiving 70% full charge. But because I'm living it, I don't realise that. I don't realise that I'm living it. I maybe know deep down that something isn't right. I maybe know that I could feel better about myself. But because I'm living with the 70% charge, I'm used to it. But the experience of starting to live in your own truth is profound, because what you will find, and the reason a lot of people struggle with this is because when they start living in their own truth, it very quickly in your life shows who should be in your life and who shouldn't. So when you embark on that period of change and self-acceptance and discovery, you've got to be willing to make any change that comes as a result of that. So if you are with someone that doesn't have your best interests at heart, someone who maybe is using you, or someone where you're in a kind of a toxic kind of what you get and what you're giving, you might need to cut some of those off. But what I would say to people about trauma is once you can come at it with peace, you will live a much more fulfilling life, and you will be much more at one with you, your destiny, where you're going. And I think it's a healthy thing to do. And I think whether people express that in art or talking or therapy or journaling or podcasting, whatever it might be, a good honest conversation with a friend or a partner about the way you're feeling, however you express it, it needs to be expressed, and to just simply ignore it, you're only harming yourself.
Mm-hmm. That brings me nicely on to my next question, actually, which is how do you navigate the balance between acknowledging your past and focusing on the present and the future?
That's a very good question again. Just give me the first bit of it again.
How do you navigate the balance between acknowledging your past, which we've just spoken about today, but also focusing on the present and also the future?
I think the first thing you've got to do is you've got to look at your relationship with yourself. For too long now, I have talked to myself not like I would a best friend. So I'll give you an example, because you are a best friend. You've made some fuck ups in your time, or lessons learned, and this is how I talk to myself at times. You fucking idiot. You shouldn't have done that. You're a fucking knob. Why have you done those, made those things? Why have you done that? And I'm talking to myself really badly, and I'm being really hard on myself. Now, I would never talk to you like that. I would say, look, that's, you've learned a lot from that. We would go through the motions of it. And I think the first thing you've got to do is stop beating yourself up. What has happened has happened. And you may be at a point where you can look at it and realize that there is no such thing as a mistake. No such thing as a mistake you carry with a sense of shame. It's a bad thing. We're programmed from a very young age that mistakes are not good. Red cross, green tick, schoolwork, notebook, all of these things are lessons. You learn a lesson, and we all have to learn hard lessons. We have to. People are kidding themselves if they believe that there are people out there that are not living with, people have not had depressive experiences, have not had pain, not had hurt, not made bad decisions. We all do. And I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to be at peace with the past. Mm-hmm. Now, I've spent years saying, oh, my only regret is joining the police. Well, is it even a regret? Is it really? Because if I hadn't have done that, yes, okay, the whole experience was like the dark night of the soul. But if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be where I am right now. I probably wouldn't even be with you. Well, I wouldn't be with you. And I'm so, amazingly grateful of that. So you've got to be at peace with the past. Now, we all know that living in the present is the most important thing, because as soon as you're in the present, the monkey brain goes, you're actually living life. We don't live in the present time enough, I don't think. Well, I don't. It's still something I'm trying to work on all the time. I'm by no means an expert in this subject, but you spend a third of your life sleeping, you spend a third of your life working, and you spend a third of your life doing what you want to do. And the amount of time we will spend thinking about the past or thinking about the future and not being present in the moment, it's craziness. You've got to live your life in the present, but you've got to be at peace with the past, and it's important to, yes, have plans for the future. But if you're never living in the present by always focusing on the past or the future, because the only thing that matters is the right now. Surely tomorrow doesn't exist yet.
I think I would add to that by just asking you, what is the overriding thing that you've said to me whilst you've been in Canada that you've been feeling?
I've said to you that I have been feeling a lot more present. So when I was on the plane out here, oh my God, I was not present. My mind was all over the place. I'd got into my mind that I was really going to miss Matt when I was away, and I was going to find that hard. I was worried about what I was thinking about everything other than the plane seat I was sitting in. Honestly, it was crazy. Honestly. But since I've been here, I have become more present. You know, I've gone through, my life recently has gone through a lot of change. It's gone through a lot of change in terms of how I live my life, how I spend my spare time, and whatever. And I've realised to stop being so hard on myself about that. And I've realised myself to start living even more in my truth. You might think, because I sit on this podcast, I'm speaking my whole truth all the time. No, I'm not. Sometimes I even have to check in with myself to say, Jason, are you really being present? Are you really being present? And it's made me realise as well that it's okay some days to go out there and eat a massive McDonald's or whatever it might be. Sometimes you've got to look at life as the bigger picture. And are you being too hard on yourself by beating yourself up every time you do, even if you're on a diet, every time you eat something you shouldn't eat? Do you beat yourself up too much about that? Or do you look at things on a macro level and think, well, look, the majority of the time I do this, let's live in the present and enjoy the moment? Because if I'm always worrying about something else.
Yeah. And the main thing that I would say that I've noticed about you as just a
oh no, what's he gonna say?
is, well, no, you're coming more in the present, but what have we been doing with each other since we've really met, really, is you've been digging up your past. But a lot of the how we live our life in the moment is based on the stories that we tell ourselves, and some of the times stories that we tell ourselves, we're not being completely honest. And and we'll talk a lot more about this on Trauma and Tea. We are saving a lot of the juicy stuff for that. But
I have to agree with you. We are leaving a lot of the juicy stuff, but to be honest with you, even if I wanted to, I wouldn't be able to do it all now, because what I've realised is that's too much to unpack sometimes, in not just in one episode, but in one day.
what
I
I
need
was
time to process it.
but the point that I was trying to make was that you feeling a lot more present now. I think there's a big correlation between it's not about living in the past, it's about just accepting the past for what it is, and being
I
honest
agree,
with
yeah.
yourself, with the stories that you were telling yourself about the past. Sometimes their coping mechanisms, all those sorts of things that we will unpack more. But I have noticed you're very much more present as a result of doing that. So it's not a case of living in the past it's a case of, as you said, you've buried a lot of stuff, and releasing it allows you to be more present.
It does.
Um,
And I've even become more present in our relationship. And I'm going to talk about this on another episode. I'm going to do another one because I did that episode the other day when I was having loads of anxiety. And do you know what? The really good thing is I'm going to do another episode on love and relationships, because do you know what? I want to do that with you actually, Matt, because I want to talk about, because this is such an important subject. When people tell you about attachment styles normally, you listen to an expert, then you form your own opinion, then you apply it to your own relationship. I'd love to do an episode about talking about how I, as an anxiously attached person, and my attachment style, how we have come to understand, how to navigate that. Because I think a lot of people, we've had very, very deep conversations. And I must admit, I think one of the best things people in relationships can do is to have some kind of controlled or a conversation, just open conversations about subjects. We've even, and I think this will make, and I'm not going to start giving bloopers to it, but in recent days, we have discussed some things about our relationship, which are very difficult subjects for a lot of people to talk about. And I'm sure already a lot of you is sort of jumping into your mind, what could I possibly be on about? But I do think that actually, as a result of having those, what I would call maybe a bit trickier conversations, it's made me feel even closer to you. And I think it's already enhanced our relationship. So I think Matt will be coming back onto the podcast, because what I've noticed is I do think that the times when it's just me and the microphone and the amount of energy that goes into that, because you're so aware it's just you recording, it's a totally different conversation to when you've got someone else there. And I'm very used to interviewing guests. That's very much my comfort zone, because it's very easy to ask other people questions about themselves. It is so much easier than being the person that's, got to confront their truth, but then also articulate that in a way where I can express how I felt in that moment. It's tricky. But anyway, all I can say is I think that if you want to hear more about me, then go stop over at Trauma and Tea. But we'll be doing another one of these again very soon, I'm sure. And I just want to thank everyone for, if you're still listening along, for being there. And I hope it's helped in one way or another.
Yeah. And on a closing note, then, I would just like to ask, obviously, we've discussed a lot about the link between trauma and spirituality, and I think that's been a big part of your journey, trying to develop yourself as a medium and, clearing those blockages of trauma, as they would say. Is there any piece of advice that you would like to share with others who might be going through similar experiences to you?
It's a tough question, isn't it? What I would say is I've met a lot of successful people in life, a lot of self-made billionaires I've met self-made millionaires, I've met spiritual leaders, I've met people in very powerful positions. And one thing that I've realized about a lot of these people, because I find myself looking for patterns without realizing it, but I think that comes from ADHD, from having a supercomputer brain, is most people that have really made something of their life have had a period or a challenge, and it's how they've dealt with that challenge which has given them a sense of resilience, wisdom. You think what comes from trauma normally, what is a byproduct of trauma? Well, it's the first question is, how do you deal with the trauma? What is your way of dealing with it? What is the trauma? It could be a loss. You might be suffering from grief. You might have just had a really emotional breakup. You might have lost your job. You might have even lost your home. But it's how do you deal with that in that moment? Now, most people are presented with paths in front of them, and we can all sometimes want to bury our head in the sand, because that is a natural humanly reaction to want to do that. But it's how you deal with that trauma. And I think if you're experiencing it, then the first thing is, who have you got around you to support you? Are the people that you've got around you, are they the right people to support you? Are you around people that love you at the moment? I think you've got to talk. I think find people. If you've got no one around you, then, you need to go to maybe a healthcare professional. But the first thing is, it's how you deal with that trauma. And do know that I've been in some of the lowest places in my life, which have involved, and we haven't even touched on this, was I was suicidal and had deep, dark thoughts at one point about how I was going to end it all. So much so that I couldn't even bear to be in the house. I had to get a minder to be with me because I was scared of what I'd do alone. That was only about 5 years ago. Um, we all have these times, and I think that if you're dealing with trauma, you need to deal with it. I think that is the key. You need to deal with it, whether it's talking about it, whether it's getting help from the situation, whether it's getting away, getting context. Everyone's situation is going to be unique, but you have to deal with it. You can only sweep so much under the rug. And the analogy I made earlier about the phone battery rings very much true. We all have tough times. We are all on this planet for a reason. And sometimes the people, I don't want to go off too much down a spiritual roadmap here, but well, you asked, it is the soul sync. It creeps in. But the to bring this back to the question you asked, the connection between spirituality and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that happens a lot is because we live in a material world now. Everything is material. We're phones and whatever it might be. And a lot of us feel that material success will bring us happiness. We do believe that a lot. And it's only sometimes when someone's gone through so much trauma, like a loss of someone perhaps passing away of cancer, grief, a breakup, we suddenly realise that actually what matters more than anything is loving the people. And then it starts to change our worldview. We start to question our existence after these things that happen to us. We start to question why us. We might have a question like, well, if God exists, why has he let this happen to me? It could be, we're all brought up with different belief systems, and there gets to a point in life, if you've been through something traumatic, where you start to question a lot. And normally the first question that sparks someone's spiritual journey, it's a very easy question. Why? It starts with a why. And I think there's a big connection between it. I so much so that I'm struggling to think of anyone that I've met that I would say is spiritual, and obviously that's contextual in itself, that hasn't been through trauma. I can't think of anyone. And if I do think of someone, probably what's happened is I don't know them well enough because I don't know their story.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'd just like to say, Jace, thank you so much for just being so open and sharing your story, because it is a difficult thing to do. And I'm looking forward to unpacking more with you, because I think it's not only good for your own spiritual journey, but it's also good for other people who can relate, resonate, and have gone through similar experiences.
well, here we go. Thank you to you two for coming on the Soul Sync. It's been a completely different dynamic to any other episode I've done. It's actually probably been the longest episode ever in Soul Sync history. So if you're still with us, a big thank you. I'm Jason Paul. You've had Matty from Trauma and Tea. As I said, I'm on there. Go check it out, should you want to. And until next time, bye.